All right, good evening, everybody. You're welcome to today's edition of Office Hours for our course Introduction to Programming for Data Science. I want to welcome every one of you, and it's great to have you around. So if you can hear me on the signal, but if you can't, also signal. All right. Like we discussed in class yesterday, I want to believe that everything is fine. And if you have any issues from what we discussed in class yesterday, please feel free to buzz me on the chat section. Just let me know what's happening. You could also unmute yourself if you prefer to go that route and give us a verbal feedback so that we can know what we are doing. But for today, like we discussed yesterday, we're going to be talking about data types, data structures, and every other thing. And one of the things I've tried to do is to try to see how I can make this thing as simple as possible. Because just like every other language exists, we have English, we have French, we have Spanish, Portuguese, and they all have their rules. Python is also a language. So what I'm going to do with this presentation is to try to draw a parallel, just try to draw some similarities between Python and English language, because I'm a native English speaker. English is my country's official language, so yeah. All right, so let's start. Remember, you can stop me at any time if there's anything you do not understand, and yeah, we can talk about it. You see, the first thing that I want you to get is that in English language, we use a sentence to communicate ideas between us and every other person around us. Every sentence is made up of a group of characters. And this group of characters are the things we use to just make some communication between us and every other person around us. Every sentence in Python is actually called a code. In English language, it's called a sentence. In Python language, it's called a code. A code is a group of characters used to communicate an idea with the computer. Remember, when you're writing a code, you're programming the computer. You're telling the computer what you want done. But for English language, you're discussing with your fellow humans, right? And you're telling them what you want done or sharing an experience with them. So in English language, a group of characters used to communicate an idea is called a sentence. But in Python, it's called a code. All right? That's the first thing. Now, the second thing is that in English language, a sentence is made up of one or more of the following: words, numbers, and special characters. So in a sentence, you can have a word like Michael eats every day. Those are just words. Then you can have stuff like Michael eats $10 worth of food every day. So you have numbers as part of that sentence. And in each of these, you also see punctuation marks, full stop, commas, and all that to help readability of the sentence. That way, the idea that is being communicated makes much sense. It is the same thing in Python. In Python, every piece of code is made up of one or more of the following data types. The first are words, strings, all right? And then the second one are numbers. And then the third are special characters. So you can see that just like you have in English, you have words. In Python, you also have words. Words in Python are called strings, all right? And you have numbers too in English language. In Python too, you have numbers. In Python, numbers can either be called integer, depending on if it's a whole number, or float if it has a decimal point, or a complex number if it's made up of a real number and an imaginary number. You know, those are the stuff used in advanced calculus and some other engineering operations. And Unless you're an engineer, really, you don't need to know that. Okay. So, and then we have special characters too in Python, just like we have them in English language to punctuate and to tell us what to do. We also have them like that in Python, and they are called operators because they help tell Python what to do. They make the code readable. They make the code, you know, they make the code understandable for the computer. So for example, if you're writing a for loop, like for X in Y, a colon has to come after that stuff you have just written in Python. Why? Because that colon is what is telling Python, hey, this is a punctuation. I want you to stop here and take note of whatever follows after this, all right? So without that colon, your code is going to run into an error. You're going to have an error feedback from your Python interpreter, okay? And that's the way it works. So you want to always watch out for these when you're writing your sentences. Another thing is that in English language, for a sentence to be complete, it needs to have one, a subject, which is usually a noun, and two, a predicate, which is usually a verb. All right. So, for example, if we say Michael reads every day, the subject here is Michael because Michael is the one, the whole story is all about, and he's the one that does the action. So Michael is the subject, and then reads every day is the predicate. So usually tells us what Michael does or the kind of actions that Michael does every day. All right. So any sentence that does not have a subject and a predicate, because I mean, when we say a predicate, we're talking about what the whole premise we're trying to communicate is predicated upon. That's where that word came from. So if we just say Michael and we do not attach a predicate, we have not really made sense. Anybody that picks the book and reads and just saw Michael will say, okay, maybe this guy just slept off while he was writing or something. Because you are expecting that immediately you say Michael, there's some other stuff that should go with it, as a predicate. So Michael reads every day. Subject, predicate. Also in Python language, for a piece of code to be complete, it needs to have a variable and a keyword. Remember, for English language, it has to be a subject and a predicate, but in Python, the subject is the variable, all right? And then the verb is the keyword. Let's look at this in a bit more detail. If you notice, beside the variable, I put struct type, which means that a variable can have four different, it can take four different forms, all right? A variable can take the form of a list, it can take the form of a tuple, it can take the form of a set, then it can take the form of a dictionary. We're going to look at all of these in more details as we continue this session, okay? So, but just like in English language, the subject can be a person, it can be an animal, it can be a thing, it can be a place, it can be something. All right, like they tell us those days. I don't know if they still teach that. A noun is the name of a person, an animal, a place, or a thing. So those are the four forms a subject in English language can take. It has to either be a name of a person, an animal, a place, or a thing. All right. So it's the same thing in Python. A variable can assume four shapes. It can either be a list, it can be a tuple, it can be a set, or a dictionary. All right. And then remember, for English language, there must be a predicate, which is a verb that tells that explains, what the subject does. In Python language too, there's a variable that also explains what Python is expected to, do to the subjects. All right. So What are the various keywords that we have? I normally classify keywords into four types. The first are keywords, are verbs, that conjure an output from Python. So a keyword like print, when you use that, it tells Python that I want to bring this output. So that we don't confuse things, I'll show you an example of that much later. All right. And then another set of keywords are keywords that tell Python you want to loop. So you'll see things like for, like while, like yeah, those are not the only loops, but they're just the most popular of the two. Then the third set of keywords are keywords that are used to make selections. So you see things like if, elif, else, try, except. And the fourth are the keywords that you use to do some form of transformation. Things like type, things like int, things like dict, sect, and all that. We're going to look at all of this, so don't let that phase you right now. But I'm just trying to show you how simple, it is to cross from English language to Python. Once you can understand the similarities, the moment you sit down to begin to code, everything becomes straightforward for you. Because, I mean, every sentence, like I told you here in English, must be about a noun. It must be about a subject, which is either a person, a place, or a thing. Also, every code in Python must be about a variable. And the variable can either be a list, a tuple, set, or dictionaries. All right. So when we have, I'll talk about that much later. I want to talk about collective nouns and all that, but I'll talk about that much later in the course. Okay. So now that we have understood this, the next thing we need to understand, remember, we have these data structures that variable can be. All right. So the next thing we need to know is what are the features of these data structures? And every data structure in Python, basically four of them, lists, tuples, sets, dictionaries, have two major characteristics. The first is whether they are ordered. And then the second is whether they are mutable or changeable, if you like, or both of them are the same thing. Now let's take the first one, which is the list. The list is a data structure type that is ordered. Ordered means that, for example, I'm sure the streets you live in is ordered, which means that every house has a number on the streets. So when I come into this house and I want to refer to your house, maybe you live on number 20 or number 25, I will just, say I am going to number 25. And because that order exists, anybody that is directing me already knows where I want to go to. So he says, okay, 25 is that blue house or that orange colored house, 3-story building, and like that. Okay. So if your Python, if your data structure type is ordered like a list, then it means that it has index numbers with which you can refer to them. Mutable or changeable means that can you change it? Can you change what is inside of that list the moment you create it? If you cannot change it, then that means it's not mutable. But if you can change it, it's mutable. All right. I'm going to show practical examples of this shortly. The next is a tuple. Is your tuple ordered? Yes. Your tuple is ordered in the sense that just like the lists, if you want to access a particular thing in a tuple, you have to access it based on the number, the index, all right? But is it changeable? No. Which means that anything that you create as a tuple cannot be changed. You can't perform any operation on it that would change it, all right? For a set is not ordered, which means that you can't refer to it, by numbers. Now, imagine you go into a housing estate, but every house in that estate is different. None of them has the same color. None of them has numbers, obviously, but they're not numbered. But none of the houses have the same color. None of them have the same number of stories. So what that means is that you enter the estate and you, the first person that builds a one-story building is the only one-story building that's going to be in that estate. So any other person that wants to come in has to build a two-story. All right. So once someone has built a two-story, that's the only two-story in that estate. Any other person that wants to build has to build a three-story. So when you come into such an estate and you want to go somewhere, maybe you want to go visit your friend, all your friend just needs to tell you is maybe the number of floors that he has. So he just tells you, when you go into that estate, go to the four-story building. Why is he able to tell you that? The reason is simple, because he knows that there are no duplicates in the estate. So if there's any four-story building that you see there, that's my house. All right. That's the way a set is in Python. A set is not ordered in the sense that it doesn't have numbers. You cannot reach it by number one, number two, or any form of indexing. But then the only thing that can help you with a set is that a set is unique, totally unique. All the items in the set are unique. So in order to refer to those sets, you have to refer to it by that uniqueness in that set. Just like I said, you might need to refer it by the number of stories or maybe by the color of the house or something. All right, but just know there are no duplicates in that set. So are sets mutable? Yes, they are mutable. You can change, you can update, you can delete, you can do anything you want to do, all right, to sets, and it'll be fine. What of dictionaries? Are dictionaries ordered? Before Python 3.7, dictionaries were not ordered, which means that just like sets, you had to, rely on some form of unique way to reach a dictionary's items. But with effect from Python 3.7, dictionaries have now become ordered. Now, are dictionaries mutable or changeable? No, technically. But I'm going to show you why I said no technically, because a dictionary on its own is mutable. You can change its items. But the moment you assign a key to something, then those keys are not changeable. You can't change them. So let's take some examples, then we'll come back to talk about series crude. All right. So let's just quickly take some examples and we will come back to talk about what to do to your series. Now, this is it. I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code as my IDE. Yesterday in class, we talked about various kinds of IDEs. There are different kinds of IDEs. You can use PyCharm, you can use Atom, Sublime, Notepad++, Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio Community Edition. You can use, I've mentioned PyCharm, you can use Jupyter Notebooks, you can use you can use Spider. There are a lot of tools you can use you can even use your command prompts. All right. But for me, I prefer using Visual Studio Code because it gives it gives me some flexibility when it comes to just writing code. But then when I have to do a data science project, I prefer to use Jupyter Notebooks. Well, not because of anything really, but because it allows us to write notes. Right? That's why I call it a notebook. So that it's not just code we have, we can actually have it like a book. It's like a notebook. We do jottings there. We explain things. We tell people, okay, this is what I want to do here. And when you perform the code and everything, you can also write an explanatory note to say, okay, this is why I did this. I mean, all right, that's a notebook. And Why it's like that is because why data scientists usually prefer to work with Jupyter notebooks is that a lot of work that we do, I'm trying to look for the right word to use now, but a lot of work that we do require a lot of explanation, because sometimes when you look at the codes, something just asks, what kind of gibberish is this? But by the time you look at the explanations that are contained in the notebook, then things begin to make some more sense. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just share my Visual Studio screen to show you what VS Code looks like. So this is my Visual Studio screen, and let's practicalize what we talked about. Or maybe, okay, you know what? Let me show you some of those data structures that we talked about. So let's start with the list. Now, if we want to create a list, let's call this new list. All right. In Python, when you're creating a list or something and you have to create a break, you're not allowed to use a space in between a variable name or something. What you should do is to use an underscore. This is called the snake case. All right. So if I want to keep new lists from Mike, I just keep putting underscores in between. All right. That creates that snake case that we talk about. And just in case your Visual Studio does not look like mine, no problem. There are just some settings you can do to change the look and the feel of your VS Code. But I just prefer this because of the contrast it gives to the eyes. So let's say I create this new list and I call it, new list. To create a new list, you need to use square brackets. And the moment you put your square brackets, your VS Code, and this is another reason why we use VS Code, because it tells us a lot of things. It helps, a lot of things that we can do. In fact, if you have very real juice in your laptop, maybe use a laptop that is, or a PC that is about maybe 3 gig, and you have up to like 16 gig of RAM. There is an app called Kites that is like an add-in to Visual Studio. You can just download it and you can use it to, it's an AI assisted way of auto completion of your code. So when you just type something and you're trying to, it automatically suggests some auto completion that helps you, just type, finish up your code. Think of it like Microsoft Swift keyboard in your Android phone or something like that. It helps your code writing to just flow like on steroids. So in this case, let's say I want to create a list of members in this class. So I'm going to, and whenever you want to create a list and the things you want to put in the list are strings, every string in Python must be put inside inverted commas, whether single commas or double commas. Whichever one you do, there's no problem. Python will recognize both of them. All right, so let me use single commas for this one, single inverted commas. The first person I want to write their name in this list is Thirth. Then I put a comma, and the second person is Omwe, and then I put a comma, and then the third person is, maybe let me use Ubuseed. All right, good. So when I do this, I've created a list. And remember, I told you that every sentence in Python is made up of two things. It's made up of a variable, just like you have subject and predicate in English language. You have variable and keyword. So now we have declared the variable. So where's the keyword? Great. Because without the keyword is the verb that that tells Python, oh yeah, act on this thing. And without the keyword, what we just have is a dummy. What we just have is useless to both Python, to you, and everything. So let's put a keyword. One of the keywords we can try out now is the print keyword, because with this, we can tell Python to bring this thing out, from where it is right now and act on it. So let's use the print keyword. And then once you put a keyword, you use this brackets, this brackets to tell Python, I want to add some commands here. And one other thing I like VS Code is this. You see, some people think that the average Python programmer has everything in his head. It's a lie. It's a very big lie. Python programming, except you're going to write a Python exam or anything, you do not need to have everything in your head. You just need to have a good IDE. An IDE is like, the meaning of IDE is integrated development environment. All right. So you just need to have a good IDE. A good IDE will tell you what you should expect inside of this place. A good IDE tells you what you should have, and then how it expects it to be. So you can see the moment I put the keyword print, Visual Studio Code is telling me, okay, the first thing you have to put are the values, what you want to print, and it can be an object. So in this case, I'm not going to just read all of this, because sometimes when you look at this, it might not make sense to you, but if you really settle down to read it, you'll be fine. So in this case, I'm now going to I'm going to put in the object that I want Python to print for me, and the object is my new list. So you can see automatically there's a suggestion, and I can just pick that suggestion. Now I will just go to this place, click here, and say run Python file in terminal. And if you notice on this base area, you can see that Python has printed out this list for me. So you can see that. All right. Now, this is a list. I might want to, like I told you, there are 4. So let's look at the second one. The second kind of data structure are tuples. So let me call this new tuple, all right, and equals to, remember when we wanted to initialize the list, we had to use square brackets. But if we're initializing a tuple, we use curved brackets. And then again, let's have Terth, Omoy, and Ogoseed. Great. Again, what we have here is useless without a keyword. So let's use this output keyword print to tell Python to print this new tuple for us, and then let's see what Python tells us. Aha. So you now see that Python tells us that, okay, the contents of this tuple are Terth, Omoy, Ogoseed. Now, if you notice, the first answer and the second answer are both the same. But you can notice that one is in square brackets, the other is in curly brackets. Why is that? Because the first one is a list, the second one is a tuple. And another thing is this, you might ask yourself, when do I need a list? When do I need a tuple? Very simple. If the variable that you're dealing with is one that can be updated per time, all right, then you need a list. But if the variable that you are dealing with does not change, does not require periodic updates, then it just makes sense to put that variable in a tuple. All right. So it all depends on the kind of code you are writing, really. Those are the things that will determine what you would do, whether you are trying to create whether you should use a tuple, you should use a list, or whatever data structure. So let's go to the third data structure. Now that is a set. So I will call this new set. To initialize a set, we use curly braces. We use curly braces. So let me put the same people, Terth, Omoi, and Ugoseed. All right. And then I tell Python, print new sets for me. If I run this in the terminal is this base part of the window that you see. Again, this is what I get. I get the same 3 people, but now as a set. Remember, I told you that the set does not allow duplicate items, even though they are unordered, but they don't allow duplicate items inside. So imagine if I come here, let me delete this, and I write Terth again. When I tell Python to print this set for me, watch what Python is going to do. Do you notice that Python removed the first occurrence of Terth? Like I told you, in a set, Python does not allow duplicates. All right. And then the last kind of data structure are dictionaries. Okay, so let's build a dictionary and let's try to do some crude operations on a dictionary and on a list, and let's see how it works. So let's begin with a dictionary. Now I'm going to call this new dict. All right, and I am going to, I remember I told you when you want to create a new dictionary, you have to open it up. You have to use curly brackets. All right, so I'm calling this new dictionary. Remember that you have key value pairs in your dictionary. So like I was explaining to you, Python doesn't care if what you have is a single comma or a double inverted comma, but it doesn't matter. So before I put this, let me call this car brands. And one of the things you know a car brand has, let me just call these features of car brands, are it has a name, then year of production, then one more feature, maybe manufacturer. And let's just say that those are the 3 features that we want to look at in the dictionary. So let's pick the first one, name. All right, we'll put a colon, and then we'll call that Ford. Always remember to put a comma after every item in your dictionary. Let's put the second one, which is the year of manufacture. And then because this is a number and not a string, I'm going to just put the number directly. So let me just use 1958, put a comma after that. And then the third one, manufacturer. Let me just put that, sorry, in inverted commas. And the manufacturer, let me call it Ford Motor Co. All right. So because it's the last thing in the dictionary, I am not going to put a comma there, so I'm just going to come here now and ask Python to print me my dictionary, and let's see what Python brings out in the output. So you can see Python has printed out the content of the dictionary. So a key is the name, and it's Ford, year 1958, manufacturer Ford Motor Co. Now, like I was telling you about CRUD operations, if you want to access, maybe just read an item in this new dict, when you put in your square bracket, well, that's how you access any features. Really, that's one of the shortcuts to access any features in any form of Python object and data structure. All right, so if I put it, just have manufacturer, and you have name and then year. So these are the keys. If I just decide to click on this, print this manufacturer, and I close this, sorry, I close this here, by the time I run it, it's going to print out Ford Motor Co for me. All right, so that's the way I access my dictionary features. Now remember I told you that a dictionary has now become ordered. This is what it is. All right, but the keys are immutable, which means you can't change them. All right, you can't change them. Okay, so that's it for dictionaries. There are a lot of examples you can try, and you can try that on your own, because we don't want to make this class longer than necessary. So advise you just check your project file. You will see a lot of examples that will put up in the project file. Do all of these examples for yourself, and you'll get to brush yourself up on this. For every variable type, you have 4 things that can be done to them. You can either create, read, update, or delete. These are the 4 basic things that you do to every variable type: create, read, update, delete. For a list, how do you create it? We've seen how that one is done. You create it with a square bracket, or you use this constructor called list. It's a keyword, all right, and then you can update it by referring to the index. You can read it by referring to the index. You can update it, like add to it, by using a method like append, extend, insert. You can delete completely by using a method like del, pop, remove, del. Okay, I have del there before, right? Okay, same thing for tuple. You can, because the tuple is ordered, you can refer to it with an index. But you see, a set is not ordered, so you cannot refer to it by way of an index. That means you can't read it by way of an index. If you want to read a set, you probably have to look at it directly with its features. All right. So you can update it by adding or using the update method. You can delete a set or any of its part by using the remove, discard, or pop method. Now, enough of this theory. Let's go back and write some practical code. Now, let's look at lists. Let's say I have a list of the class members in this class, and the names of the people I have in the list are, let me say, Terth again. We have Omri. We have Ogosid. All right, these are the 3 people. Now, let me tell the computer to print this out so that you can see. Okay, so when I tell the computer to print this out, you can see that, yeah, these are the 3 people in class. But then, what if there are other people in the class and I want to add them to this list? How do we go about it? There are a lot of ways. If you remember, I told you that there are a number of ways you can update a list. You can use the append method, you can use the extend, you can use the insert method. All right, so this is what you can do. For this one now, let's say we want to append somebody, maybe another member of the class. We can use the new list dot. Remember, yesterday when we were in class, we talked about object-oriented programming, and that one of the ways you know a programming language is object-oriented, is that you use the dot notation to access either a property or a method in that language. So here, by the time we put new list dot, remember, new list is a list. The variable new list is actually a list. It brings out all the different properties and methods that are available to you in this list kind of data structure. So let me use the append, which is the first one. All right, and I'm going to put, and it's asking me for a string. So let me just put Aziz as one of the members of the class, and then now tell Python to print me a new list. Now, if you look, you would notice that we now have 4 people in the list, which is Terth, Omoye, Ogosid, and Aziz. Now, another way we can do this is the extend method. So how can we do that? Very simple. I can come here and say, create another variable and call that other class members. All right. And then in that other class members, I have some other people who are part of the class, Aziz, and I have Manal, and I have Ife. All right, so let me just say these are 3 people. Okay, so I can now come here and tell Python to print me new lists, or maybe let me use this first. Let me say new list dot extend. All right, now when I put this bracket there, Python tells me that I am expecting something iterable. What is an iterable? An iterable is something that Python can iterate upon. An iteration means that you can count it, or you can perform some counting operation on top of it. So for example, a string, which is the name of a person, you can perform counting operations on it. So let's assume a person's name is Aziz. We can spell it as Azeez. That's a counting operation. That's an iteration. So we are iterating upon every letter of that word Aziz. So whenever you see iterable, all right, in a Python requirement like this one here, they're just telling you that the objects that they want there, in this case, which is a string, you can see str there, should be something that Python can iterate upon. So I'm going to put this other class members here so that Python can iterate upon it, and then I will now tell Python to print what the new list is. Right now, remember, I have made some amendment to this new list by extending it with these other class members. So let's print this out and see what Python will make it look like. Aha, so you can see that we have Terth, Omoye, Ugosid, Aziz, Manal, Ife. All right, so those are basically how you do these things. These things are very easy. All you just need to do is just to keep practicing. With enough practicing, then you will just find out that you get better and better. All right, we don't want to make this session too long. That's why we're just trying to cut it off at this point. But please, by all means, as you do your class projects, if you have any questions or you encounter any difficulties, please give us a shout so that we can know how to help solve the issue. All right. So with that, we have come to the end of today's office hours. And thank you for being there and for listening. All right. If there are any questions, you can ask it now. Is there any of such? Any questions? None? Anybody? Okay, none. All right. So let's call it a day. And always remember, you can reach out to us at every point in time or whatever it is that disturbs you. All right, then do take care and